Unix. Unix is considered as the mother of most of the operating system. The Linux and the Mac operating system, they have taken Unix as their base. And the design of Unix system, it includes usage of plain text for data storage, the hierarchical file system. There the directory is in the form of a hierarchical file system, handling devices and some specific kinds of inter-process communication as files, employing a huge number of software tools, multiple small, simple and modular programs which can be threaded together via a command line interpreter using pipes, contrasting to use a single monolithic program which comprises of all the same functionality. The master control program of Unix is its kernel, and kernel which is used in Linux, that has evolved. That is why I told you Linux has evolved from Unix. But it is different. Linux is different in many aspects, but the kernel has remained within the Linux, and the kernel has full control over the entire system because it is what brings in that operating system function. It has subsystems that offer services to file system handling, resource handling, memory management, start and stop programs, and few other low-level code tasks. The kernel is the heart of the operating system and acts as an interface between the user and hardware. Each kernel subsystem has certain features like concurrency, virtual memory, paging, and a virtual file system. In the outer layers of the architecture, we have the shell, commands and application program. Shell is again an interface between the user and the kernel. Once kernel booting takes place, kernel starts to work. It takes over the command, and once kernel starts to work, then comes in shell. So shell is the interface between the user and the kernel. Shell and the user types in the commands interpret these commands and call the computer programs accordingly. Example of the Unix operating system is Solaris and HP UX. The largest distributors of Unix systems include IBM, HP and Sun. There are many different versions of Unix, although they share some common similarities, and the ones are Sun, Solaris, the Linux or the GNU, and Mac OS X. The shell acts as an interface between the user and the kernel. When a user logs in, the login program checks the username and password and then starts another program called the shell. The shell is a command line interpreter. It interprets the commands the user types in and arranges for them to be carried out. The commands are themselves programs. When they terminate, the shell gives the user another prompt, that is % usage that has taken place on our system. The adept user can customize his or own shell, and users can use different shells on the same machine. It is actually adapted according to our needs. Files and processes within an Unix. Everything in Unix is either a file or a process. A process is an executing program identified by a unique PID, which is process identifier. A file is collection of data. They are created by users using text editors, running compilers, etc. And files, a document, that is report, essay, etc. The text of a program written in some high-level programming language. Instructions comprehensible directly to the machine and incomprehensible to a casual user. A collection of binary digits, that is what takes place in a Unix. A directory that contains information about its content, which may be a mixture of other directories, which is subdirectories, and an ordinary file. So if you want to access a file, you need to start from the directory, from the root of the directory, and there are subdirectories, and then comes the files. This is the structure of a directory. All the files are grouped together in the directory structure. The file system is arranged in a hierarchical structure like an inverted tree. The top of the hierarchy is traditionally called the root, and from the root is designated by the letter slash. From the root starts the files like home, it's UG1, say. So each contains some files in which it is stored. This is the hierarchical structure of Unix, and this hierarchical structure of directories followed today also in Linux and Mac. The root, it has a temporary one, a user one, and a variant one. Then home is there. So based on that, if you want to access a document, this is the directory that you have to follow. Advantages of Unix: full multitasking, one with protected memory. Multiple users can run multiple programs each at the same time without interfering with each other or crashing the system. Very efficient virtual memory, so many programs can be run with a modest amount of physical memory. Access controls and security: all users must be authenticated by a valid account and password to use the system at all, which increases the security of the system. And all files are owned by particular accounts. The owner can decide whether others have read, the others can read or write access to his file. A rich set of small commands and utilities that do specific tasks well, not cluttered up with lots of special options. Unix is a well-stocked toolbox, not a giant to-do-it-all Swiss Army knife. And it's mainly based on commands and utilities together in unlimited ways to accomplish more complicated tasks, not limited to pre-configured combinations or menus as in personal computer systems. A powerfully unified file system: everything is a file, data, programs, and all physical devices. Entire file system appears as a single large tree of nested directories. Regardless of how many different physical devices are included, usually you can see it as a single large tree. A lean kernel that does the basics for you but doesn't get in the way when you try to do the unusual, that when you want to personalize it, then kernel is no longer a hindrance in your way. It is shell that is modified for personal use. Available on a wide variety of machines, the most truly portable operating system, and optimized for program development and thus for the unusual circumstances that are the rule in search. And disadvantages are also there. The traditional command line shell interface is user hostile, designed for the programmer, not the casual or user or the layman. You need to learn about the commands to run the program. And commands often have cryptic names and give very little response to tell the user what they are doing. Much use of special keyboard characters, a little typos have unexpected results. To use Unix well, you need to understand some of the main design features. Its power comes from knowing how to make commands and programs interact with each other, not just from treating each as a fixed black box. And richness of utilities, often more than 400 standard ones are there, and documentation is short on examples and tutorials that help you how to use these tools are not present. That is one of the main disadvantage of Unix. And Unix also, the operating system does not work on present computers. That is also one of the disadvantages that Unix has over Mac, Linux and Windows.